Good afternoon and welcome to UK Column Live from our Plymouth, England studio. And of course today is Friday the 13th, 2013. We're very pleased to be back after a couple of days break. We'll tell you more of that in due course. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
Well, first of all, a brief comment on the weather. My goodness, if you were north in the country yesterday in Manchester or Liverpool, it was pretty chilly but dry. But of course, what came in over the West Country yesterday was more rain and mist and clag. And we've got a fairly chilly day today, but we're not going to allow that to bother us. Well, we're going to focus in again today on really how our minds are being manipulated. And we're going to take a look at what a couple of charities have been up to. But first of all, we're going to bring up this article from the Daily Mirror. Well, here it is. 60-year-old paedophile has prison sentence quashed after court rules relationship with a child victim is romantic. So this is a pretty punchy headline. Of course, the incident did actually take place in Italy. But the nub of it is that because the 11-year-old girl said that she was in love with the gentleman concerned, the prison sentence was actually quashed by the judge. Now, the article points out that in Italy, the age of consent is 14, unless there is some form of formal relationship between the two people, in which case the age can rise to 16.
Yeah, but that's only if one of the parties is, if there's a big age gap between them, right?
No, this is to do with, effectively it's to prevent people who may have power over another individual. Right. So it's to do with a controlling sense. But the interesting thing in this particular case that we've just brought up is the fact that the man concerned was effectively a carer for the girl. What we believe is going on here, and of course the high profile that the Mirror's given to this, is we're seeing an increasing drive towards lowering the age of consent, which of course is going to allow the state to move in its extreme sex education programme. And we'll have a little more on that. Well, the Mirror also decided to have a look at internet porn, violent music, films and computer games, and it said that these are all to blame for a child crime wave. Now, this is an interesting headline. I think many parents would say that they've been worried over a great many years at the effect of increasingly violent films, an increasing amount of pornography in ordinary programmes that are shown, for example, by the BBC, violent music and unpleasant language, and indeed increasingly violent computer games. Those can be expected to have some sort of effect on people. But of course, the Mirror's article quoted a gentleman called Jason Royce of the Romance Academy, a national sex and relationships education project, which it says negative influences from older peers are a factor, but they seem to have another agenda. So unlike the Mirror, we thought we'd have a look behind the scenes at the Romance Academy. Well, here we are. So it says the Romance Academy is a nationwide sex and relationships education initiative run by youth workers licensed to use our material. Our unique 14-week intervention project addresses the underlying causes of risky youth behaviour, such as poor self-esteem, low aspirations, and a lack of positive family life by promoting the values of stable relationships. So what they seem to be saying is, well, it's not so much the fault of what the youngsters are exposed to, i.e. let's get rid of the pornography or the violent films or the bad language. What we are going to do is get alongside the youngsters and mentor them and coach them in order to change the way they think and behave. So we dug deeper, and here's a bit of history of the Romance Academy. It began life back in September 2005 when the BBC showed a 3-part documentary called No Sex, Please, We're Teenagers, which followed the lives and loves of the very first Romance Academy. So good to see the BBC at the back of this. This is talking about our academies, and it does say that there are branch offices, although that seems to be fairly limited at the moment. But we thought we'd just have a look at the people, because that's always a good start when we're looking at what is really happening. So here's the man who was featured in the Mirror article, Jason. He's a youth worker with over 12 years experience with local authorities, schools, churches and community settings. And he's spoken widely to many different audiences about the needs of young people in today's society. So he believes in healthy relationships and empowering parents, youth workers, churches, schools and other youth organisations to tackle this issue. So we'll say 12 years is not a huge amount of experience for this young man, but he's going to change the world. Well, let's see who's working with him. We've got a lady called Rachel Gardner. Now, she's been involved with the BBC's No Sex Please, and she can be found shopping, drinking and chatting to strangers. So this lady, very experienced, but this is the bit at the bottom. She's a lover of period dramas and of her husband, Jason, by night. So this is a husband and wife team. They've got this young lady working with them, and we were fascinated by this. Andrea joined the Romance Academy in February 2010 as our National Development Officer. The brief was simple: turn Romance Academy into a worldwide multi-billion-pound enterprise within the first 3 months. Amazingly, we're only a few pence away from this modest target. Please visit our donations. Now, when we called the Romance Academy this morning, we were very surprised to find that we didn't actually speak to the Romance Academy. What we got is a list of other organisations that are simply networked in order to give the illusion that the Romance Academy is a solid organisation. And one of the organised mentioned was Youthscape, but there were other organisations including into self-harm and that sort of thing. But we're just going to take a look into one particular area here. Mike?
Yeah, so this is Youthscape. This is their charities page on the Charity Commission website, and we thought we'd have a look to see who is funding this organisation, because the Romance Academy, although they were pretty keen not to tell us who was funding them, they did say that Youthscape was the main organisation behind them. So let's look and see who's behind Youthscape. So we had a look at their accounts, and we've got the Edith Winifred Trust, we've got the Jerusalem Trust, we've got BBC Children in Need, Comic Relief, and so on down the list there. But the biggest donor by far was the Edith Winifred Trust, with £200,000 donated in 2012. Now I want you to remember that figure, £200,000 from the Edith Winifred Trust. So let's have a look at the Edith Winifred Trust. There they go there. And what do we see? Well, we see that they had £67,000 of income in 2012 and £1 million of expenditure. How does that work?
I'm not sure.
Right, well, looking at the accounts, it looks like it works because they've got a lot of investments, but actually for the range of accounts that are available on the Charity Commission website, it is unclear where that money came from in the first place, because they always seem to be spending about £1 million more than they bring in. So it's unclear where that money came. But when we go to look at their accounts, these are the organisations that they're funding, and you'll see Youthscape at the top. But what seems very strange to me is that they say in their accounts that they give, that's the Edith Winifred Hall Trust, they give Youthscape £450,000, but yet in Youthscape's accounts they say that they received £200,000 from the Edith Winifred Hall Charitable Trust in 2012. And I don't get, there's £250,000 has disappeared somewhere. There's a disparity between these two sets of accounts, and I'm not quite clear. Does the Charity Commission not care about this? Is this not the type of thing that the Charity Commission is set up to look out for?
Mike, I'm sure many people will pick up on those accounts that they've got draft stamped across them.
Right.
What's your comment on that?
That is the very interesting thing, because that set of accounts came from the Charity Commission website. By clicking on the link 30th of June 2012, on the right hand side of that under the word view, there is a link there that says accounts. You click on that and you get this document. So our charity is now submitting draft documents to the Charities Commission as signed off accounts. That's one of the disparities. The other disparity, as I say, is the fact that there's £250,000 unaccounted for between these two charities, in the sense that their two sets of accounts do not match. So if there are any accountants out there that might be able to explain to me how this type of thing might happen, I would be very interested to understand it.
Yeah. Well, of course, even some of the mainstream press is now finally starting to ask questions about what is going on behind some of Britain's biggest charities. If you're a newcomer to the charity scene, you might be stunned to learn that how many are there? Well, there's over 170,000 different charities. Of course, many of them are small organisations where people are doing their level best to help their fellow men, women and children in Britain or overseas. But in fact, many of the top charities are being run as something equivalent to corporations. And we've now got an industry which is a minimum of £44 billion running in UK. And of course, we know that many of the charities are actually taking public money, including from the Cabinet Office. So it's highly questionable as to whether we should regard them as charities or whether they've simply become political arms of the government. And we've, of course, pointed our finger many times at the political organisation Common Purpose, which has taken funding, a huge amount of funding from the public sector, while claiming simply to be a charity there to help people. So we're going to look into this further. But what is clear is that the Romance Academy seemed unbelievably nervous to receive a phone call. We identified ourselves very clearly. We asked some simple questions about who they were linked in with and who the main funders were. And I'm going to say the young lady who answered the phone appeared very nervous. She went away to speak, I believe, to one of the financial directors. And the next result is the phone was firmly put down. So if anybody out there is curious as to what's going on and they're worried about which individuals are getting close to their own children and what they're actually doing, perhaps you'd give us some help by researching the Romance Academy. Well, we're going to come back to a subject that we touched upon last week. And of course, this is the tragic case of Sergeant Alexander Blackman, the Royal Marine Sergeant that was recently convicted and sentenced to a minimum of 10 years. Our comment at the time was that the incident was unbelievably tragic, and we pointed out that, of course, the background to this is itself an unlawful war where many thousands of innocent men, women and children are being killed, but of course the people who started those wars are not actually paying the price, but an individual like Sergeant Alexander Blackman, who did something which at the time we could all sit back and say was questionable, but he receives a minimum sentence of 10 years. Now the papers were lining up very nicely because we identified that this man was being branded a murderer, not once but twice in one simple article. And it was described as one of the most brutal stories to emerge from Britain's Asian conflicts. We would prefer to see another one of Britain's unlawful wars. Whether this incident was the most brutal, I think, is highly questionable because we don't know what else goes on in those conflict areas. Of course, the man who Sergeant Blackman shot had already been struck by a helicopter attack, and so somebody else somewhere pulled the trigger before Alexander Blackman. However, the issue here is that we have a whole range of people who've been responsible for creating unlawful wars, be it in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and many of them were desperate to start another one in Syria. They're still sitting in their warm, cosy offices. So we come back to the man who's taken the brunt of the establishment, Sergeant Alexander Blackman, and we were stunned 2 days ago to receive calls from people saying, were we aware of Judge Blackett, the man who actually sentenced Sergeant Blackman? Well, we've done some research into his background. We knew he was a Navy man, and I'm going to apologise unreservedly for that as a former naval officer myself. But here's the judge. Meet Judge Blackett, the man who passed sentence. What is his background? Well, what we had completely missed was that this judge sits as a trustee for Help the Heroes. And we just call up his page. Here he is. Our trustees are all passionate about ensuring our wounded, injured and sick get the very best support for life. And then we've got a glowing CV about His Honour Judge Jeff Blackett, graduated in law from University College London. He's sat in naval court-martials. He was the commander of HMS Collingwood, director of Navy Pay and Pensions, and he's also acted as a Metropolitan Stipendiary Magistrate, etc. So this gentleman has a glowing record, both as a naval officer and as judge. But what many people are absolutely outraged about is that he can simply hop from Help for Heroes as a trustee into a court where he doesn't help the armed forces, he passes judgment on them. And many people who contacted us pointed out that there are now tens of thousands of people who are aware of this fact. They're extremely annoyed about it. And many people are saying, of course, this has got to be sheer hypocrisy, that on one hand you put yourself forward as supporting Britain's armed forces, and particularly those in their hour of need, but when occasion calls, you simply don your wig and move across into judgment to those people.
Yes, surely he should have recused himself either from the court case, or if he was determined to follow through on the court case, then he should recuse himself from Help for Heroes, surely.
Well, I would agree with that. If maybe people out there haven't have heard of the phrase recuse, this is the right word for a judge standing down because of a conflict of interest. It would seem to us that the minimum that this judge should now do is actually stand down as a trustee for Help the Heroes. How can you possibly have an organisation putting itself up to be supporting and helping British troops, particularly injured troops in their time of need, when your trustees are prepared to hop across to the other side and sit in judgment of those very same men? I've got to say I'm appalled as a former Royal Navy officer that we should have one of our own who's moved into this position. It's hypocrisy, but it's absolutely vile. Well, when we spoke to Help for Heroes, as we did at roughly 7 o'clock on Wednesday morning, they were a little bit flustered. I'm going to say the press officer I spoke to didn't really seem to understand that there was concern out there. 24 hours later, we've got in contact again to see whether Help for Heroes would be prepared to make a formal press statement on this subject. But again, they appeared very, very reluctant to do so. So at the moment, it appears that Help for Heroes are dealing with this situation by simply ignoring it, and presumably they're going to hope the unhappiness dies down and gently drifts away. If anybody is a member of the armed forces, or obviously an ex-member of the armed forces out there, and agrees with us that this situation is intolerable and that His Honour Judge Blackett should stand down, we would very much appreciate hearing from you. Drop us a line, and we'd also be interested to know what's going on amongst the tens of thousands of you who are now starting to say something's got to happen. It certainly has. Well,
right, moving on.
Living standards.
Living standards. I just not going to spend too much time on this article in the Mail. I just want to point out that it is an absolute propaganda piece. Living standards in the UK really are better, Mr. Balls. Families now enjoy the 6th highest quality of life in the EU. This is figures from the Office for National Statistics, which the Mail says give weight to Chancellor George Osborne's claim that the, quote, economic plan is working. Well, the Mail produces this little diagram to describe, based on the ONS statistics, to describe how Britain has moved up from number 7 to number 6 in a year in terms of quality of life. Does the Mail ask how this has happened? No, they simply push the government propaganda line that everything is all well and good in the UK, when in fact everything is not well and good in the UK. It just happens to be worse in France and in Denmark. So the reason that Britain is moving up the league table is because other countries are falling down it faster than we are, and that's the simple explanation for it. Absolute propaganda piece from the Mail, and don't really want to say any more because it doesn't warrant it.
Yes. Well, we're getting increasingly interested in how the propaganda machine works in UK, and of course we know sometimes people are drawn into it by the expression they're a useful idiot. They don't really understand, they don't check the sources, they don't understand what the purpose of the material is passed to them, but it's repackaged and pushed out again. And I'm just going to comment, I know on our own comment box, a few of you are now commenting on Help for Heroes. I'm just going to add to the report we've made that, of course, we do understand there are very many people out there involved with Help for Heroes who are doing sterling work for troops who've lost limbs, been injured in the fighting. We recognise that. However, we're going to stand by our guns on the basis that you simply can't have a trustee hopping across into a court in judgment. It's a nonsense. Well, who's this man then? He seems to be in a position of influence, judging by the view out the window.
Yeah, I mean, again, another bit of propaganda here, I suspect, but the doctors routinely help dying patients along the way, the Lords are told, and this is a comment in the House of Lords that they're saying it's an illusion to deny that doctors routinely end patients' lives and in order to spare them suffering. And of course, this is another propaganda piece in an effort to make it seem more reasonable that people end up on Liverpool Care Pathway and other similar types of programs. But we were discussing this earlier. I think there's a very thick line. Actually, it's not even a fine line. It's a thick line between making a clinical judgment to withdraw treatment when somebody is right at the end of their life. Or using an economic or a financial motive for making that decision, and making that decision earlier than it needs to be. End-of-life care should be, I think, there to make sure that people have as good a time at the end of their lives as they possibly can with their families, and not ending their lives prematurely.
I think on this subject, Mike, it's coming from central government, but of course it's coming in through the management structure, particularly the NHS. Unbelievably cynical, because of course doctors have always had to make very difficult judgments over people's treatment. Were they going to survive? Perhaps they're in pain, so you give them morphine, but that's actually going to cause another problem, which is not helping them, but you have taken the pain away. So doctors have been very brave, I think, traditionally, because they've had to make these difficult life and death judgments, but they were able to do that with a sense of, I'm going to use the word honour, that they were ultimately there to help and assist people. Now what we've got is a political agenda, which is clearly about budgets and profit, saying, well, if we can get rid of that person 2 weeks earlier or 2 weeks before they would die, we can save ourselves £10,000. This is the cynical aspect. So is this guy a good guy or a bad guy in the picture?
Look, it's a conversation that happened in the House of Lords, and
we wait to see where it goes.
Well, we wait to see where it goes, but I'm more interested in the way that it's being portrayed in the press. Yeah. Well, Syria. Moderate Syrian rebels try to recover after Islamists take over their headquarters. The the Syrian opposition is absolutely falling apart at the moment. You could say that this is more sort of gang counter gang type of activity going on within the opposition in Syria in order just to generate as much chaos as possible. And in fact, a couple of amazing things that apparently happened in the last 48 hours, aside from the major splits and this business of the more extreme Islamists taking over the Free Syrian Army headquarters. There were rumours going around that, in fact, they had achieved a bit of a coup by getting General Idris out of the country. Now, General Idris has absolutely, well, according to Haaretz here anyway, has absolutely denied this. He says these unfounded rumours are intended to weaken the morale of the fighters at a time they need to be focused on dealing with the Assad regime's gangs. But that quote actually doesn't really tie in with the other reports that we've seen over the last week or so of Idris calling for the Free Syrian Army and the Syrian regime to cooperate in order to get rid of the the Al-Nusra Front and the Al-Qaeda elements, which have been absolutely put in there by Western governments through Saudi Arabia and Qatar and so on. So very interesting situation going on in Syria, and we wait to see how that pans out. But
also complex, Mike, isn't it? If we think back to where we were before the Westminster vote, we had a situation where Assad is branded as the totally as the bad guy. Then we've got a selection of rebel forces. They need support. We need to get rid of Assad. David Cameron and his colleagues calling for war effectively. They don't get the vote through. And then what we're watching is Syria degenerate into a complete war zone.
That's absolutely right. So what we had was Western governments through Saudi Arabia and other influences trying to get these various factions in the opposition working together as under an umbrella, which was the Al-Nusra Front. They tried to get them working together and working in one direction. Whenever the vote failed in Parliament, no matter how that came about, they have totally withdrawn that apparent support. And so the factions are now falling back into faction fighting. And of course, in the meantime, all these foreign extremists who actually weren't really part of the opposition at all. They came along because they could get involved in a fight from outside the country. They now have to be dealt with, and of course they are quite clearly willing to, in some cases, literally cut the hearts out of people in order to achieve whatever they want to achieve.
So we could say, from the point of view of the Western powers, things are still on track in that a stable country, albeit with immense problems and a pretty vicious dictatorship in place, has been nicely destabilised in the Middle East. We're going to just give an apology to the kind individuals that have been supplying us with information about casualties in Syria. We've had a few days off the air, but on Monday we will come back again and release some more of the figures that we're giving. And we're going to say to our audience today again, remember that we have men, women and children dying in Syria on a daily basis, but British mainstream press and media simply have got bored of the issue, so we're not reporting it. But we're going to stay on the case.
Yeah. But exactly the same operation is starting to be run in the Ukraine. Russia is the target for this, actually, and in fact, Russia is the target really with Syria as well, in a sense. But the Ukraine, of course, large natural gas reserves, decided that it doesn't want to look to Europe for its future. It wants to look east to Russia and China and India instead. European Union can't have that. So now we've got the situation where the 2,240 or so Western-backed non-governmental organisations are operating at full pelt in the Ukraine in order to carry out exactly the same type of destabilisation exercise as was done in Syria. Now we've got the situation where Russia is really starting to get pretty upset about the whole thing. Where is this going to end, really, is the question. We at least have some hope in the sense that the Ukrainian opposition leader has agreed to talk with the Ukrainian government. If they've got any sense, they will recognise the external influence on the situation and will deal with it appropriately. Unfortunately, probably that is only going to end up with demands from the opposition that the government calls elections or some other thing. But Ukraine would be crazy at this point to throw its towel in with the European Union.
One of the things I'd say here, Mike, of course, is this is on the doorstep of Russia, isn't it? Of Putin's territory. It's absolutely there. We've still, I'm going to say, we in Britain have still got an island mentality. It's always over there, overseas, over the channel. But this would be equivalent to something starting to happen, in Holland in relation to us.
Well, look, we've been talking about the fact that Russia is getting less and less comfortable with what's going on around its borders. The fact that they are pushing more and more their plans, their rehearsals, their exercises, their military strategies. We pointed out recently that they ran a nuclear exercise with their full nuclear arsenal. And we had reports in the media over the last couple of days where Russia is saying that they will not guarantee not to use nuclear weapons in the event that NATO should get involved in Russia in some way. Russia is feeling extremely under pressure because of despite the fact that the Iranian situation has cooled off, NATO is still refusing to delay or remove the missile defences that are around the Russian borders, so Russia very upset about what's happening around its western and southern borders, not just with the missile defences, but also with what's going on in Ukraine and in Syria and in the Middle East in general. So
I'm just going to risk jumping back here. If we just put Barrett, here we are. We've got the President of the United States, and I think I'm right in saying, what's he been up to over the last couple of days, producing selfie photographs with David Cameron. I'm not sure which of today's papers. I think it's probably the Mail, but there was an article saying in relation to the famous David Cameron selfie picture with the blonde, of course, that this is deeply worrying when we see our leaders behaving in this way. We know we've got all sorts of problems in Westminster. We've clearly got paedophiles at work within the Westminster system, although the police at the moment not revealing names. We've then got prime ministers taking part in little gimmicky photo sessions as if they're a 17-year-old member of One Direction.
Yeah, but this is the way he behaves when he's in Parliament as well, so it's not really surprising.
Probably not. Well, before we just finish off on Doomwatch, I'm just going to say that we've obviously been off air for a couple of days. This is not due to any sort of problem. It's the fact that we've been working behind the scenes. And I'd like to say thank you very much to all the people up in Liverpool, Manchester area we've been speaking to over the last couple of days. It's been great to hear your ideas, not only about what's going on in the country, but what good people can do to stop it. It's evident to us that there's much progress is being made in really getting into the heart of the establishment, and in particular looking at constitutional issues and what's happening in courts. And I'm also going to say we're constantly getting reports from across the country, but that was echoed in our discussions over the last couple of days, that an increasing number of Britain's police are, I'm going to say, starting to think. So they're looking at the situation, they're beginning to realise that something's badly wrong, and it's obvious that we've got good policemen and women who are now prepared to actually step forward and say they're not prepared to take what's going on. I think this is very encouraging. And the other thing that we will be talking about before the Christmas break is we've been working extremely hard on some upgrades for UK Column Live. That will be quite an exciting announcement. And there's much good work that's been done over the last 2 years, in fact, by the British Constitution Group. However, that work has had to be done very quietly in the background. But nevertheless, it has been done, and we think we're starting to see bear fruit. So we're going to end 2013, not today, but when we do our final broadcast, on some positive news for 2014.
So tonight, 6 p.m, 6 until 8, Thomas Sheridan again on Doomwatch, and of course this is in because I believe at the weekend Channel 4 is going to be doing a programme on the subject of psychopaths and psychopathy. So Thomas Sheridan on Doomwatch tonight at 6 p.m. I believe this is already, the fact that he's going to be on is already causing a lot of controversy and discussion on various Facebook pages and discussion groups.
Well,
so please watch and take part in the discussion.
Indeed, and I'm just going to add into that, of course, that we are, aside from what's happening with the police, we're also seeing members of the professional establishment, and in particular clinical psychologists and psychiatrists are starting to come forward to voice an opinion on what they're seeing happening not only in Britain but in America. And of course what they are saying is it's becoming clear that low empathy individuals, I think I'm correct in saying psychopaths are at the extreme low empathy end, but we're seeing more and more low empathy people coming into politics, indeed being selected because they're low empathy. So Thomas has been particularly good at waking people up in a quite lively and shocking way as to the types of people that are now ruling us. At the other end of the scale, we've got Kevin Bull from the Earth Needs Rebel show, who has been doing some extremely good work, including on American radio, talking with those very psychiatrists about what they feel is going on and what we need to do to counter low empathy individuals. So different styles, but we're homing in on the same subject there. That's about it, I think, Mike.
Yep.
Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you on Monday. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.